Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Awakened Intimacy podcast. We are your hosts, Greer,
No, I'm Aaron.
and it's such a joy to have you on board for this episode. Now, over the past few episodes, we've been exploring why and how couples fall into the housemate syndrome and exploring safety as a key step in really actually evolving beyond that. Today, we're going to get into some more of the juicy polarity work. And so, we're talking about sexual chemistry and looking at the role of masculine and feminine energies. And, this conversation has been a huge part of our relationship. And it's a really important concept to grab a hold of, and it has its own limitations. So we're going to be exploring that. And it's important because it's one of the dynamics that we see missing from almost all couples that we work with, and certainly most couples that we don't work with in terms of just what we see through friends and family and in society in general.
And the reason that we've structured the podcast sequence in this way is because couples need a strong foundation of sameness, of equality, of being on the same page, of mutual respect and shared values to have cohesiveness, to have a sense of solidarity and that they're working together as a healthy team.
Mm-hmm.
And then once that is established, quite often what happens is that over time there's a lack of chemistry, and that's often why couples can end up in a housemate dynamic. And the remedy to that is exploring polarity and masculine and feminine energies. And so before we go into it any further, I don't want to assume that everyone is on board with what we're talking about when it comes to masculine and feminine energies. And also just want to name that it can be a sensitive topic for people that don't like to be limited by gender roles and see gender as a social construct, or don't want to be confined to the terms of masculine and feminine. And whilst we respect that and it has its place, that's not what this conversation is about. This conversation can also apply to all types of relationships. We talk about women and men in a heteronormative dynamic because that's what we live, that's what we breathe, that's our relationship, and we can speak to that congruently. This conversation does apply to same-sex couples, and whilst it has its place, it's not what we can speak about congruently. It's not our experience. So if that is you, if you are in that type of relationship, this conversation does have its place, and we're not meaning to exclude everyone. We just really want to speak in integrity with our own experience, and particularly the couples we serve.
Because really, when we're speaking about masculine and feminine energies, we're talking about the yin and the yang, the expansion, the contraction, the give and the take that is within all of us. Michaela Boehm, one of our teachers, talks about it, our go and our slow or our flow. And so we all have these energies within us, and how they move within a male body or a women body can look a bit different. So that's what we're exploring here.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like everything in the universe, we have a duality, and that is a polarity. And even the masculine and feminine have their own light and dark expressions.
Mm-hmm.
So with healthy feminine energy, it's open, it's receptive, it's caring, it's flexible and compassionate.
And playful.
Playful.
The feminine is playful.
Yeah. With a healthy masculine expression, we're clear and focused, we've got direction, it's more action orientated, it's disciplined and active. It's yang.
So if we think about those two healthy expressions, it's kind of quite easy to invert and think, what would that look like if my feminine, or Aaron's feminine, when it's healthy, is expressive and playful and kind of flowing. If that's unhealthy, then it's that same fluidity, but it's kind of lost, it's chaotic, it doesn't really know where to go. And so it can look like overwhelm, it can look like depression, it can look like just kind of everything's too hard, so I'm just going to soften, because there's no container, there's no structure for that energy to roam free in.
And when it comes to the shadow masculine, we've got plenty of cultural observations and expressions of, what we'd call toxic masculinity. It's aggressive, it's possessive, it's controlling, it's dominating. When we spoke in the last podcast about patriarchy, a lot of patriarchy is the expression of the shadow, toxic, masculine energy in both men and women. And whilst we are going to focus on the power of masculine and feminine energy in the context of a conscious relationship to build and cultivate sexual chemistry, it actually has implications beyond that. It's really about us living as our wholeness. So one of the things that I think the non-binary folk actually are hinting towards is that we've got both energies within us, and we're not all, like, men are not pure masculine when they're integrated. Women are not pure feminine. And so I would say, rather than being non-binary, how about we just come into our wholeness and be both of these expressions? Because when we've got both, we can have loving, nurturing, strong relationships.
Yeah, and actually one of the most common complaints I will hear from women is that their man just doesn't understand, that he doesn't empathize, he's just trying to fix. And that's a really good example of how a woman needs their man to have access to his feminine, which is that empathic relational nature. And so that's a good example of how a woman has that within her and she needs that within her man. And it may well be, if you think about the yin and the yang symbol, that the woman holds most of it, but if the man doesn't have any of it, there's no connection there. And likewise, if the man is the leader, but the woman can't actually ever make a decision or take charge in her own, then it's going to be like a power over relationship rather than a power with.
Exactly, and it does relate to power, and that's why this conversation does have implications just beyond our relationships and us as individual. It's got to do with our collective, and in fact, in this episode, we're going to weave this concept into our collective evolution, because that actually shows a developmental blueprint for us as individuals and when we're in relationship, how these polarities play out. So stick around for that, because it's quite fascinating. And before we get there, I really wanted to share my own journey with how I came into this concept, and it was a really, really pivotal part of our relationship, Greer's and my relationship, when we first got together. It was something that really lit us up. It had a lot of value and created a lot of chemistry and really got us on the same page. Mm-hmm. So I was first exposed to this idea of masculine, feminine energies when I was doing a men's retreat. And the way it was framed and shared with me is that, and I don't necessarily agree with this anymore, this was just my first exposure to it. And what they shared is that men have a masculine essence, a masculine core, and the more traumatized they are, the more they create a shell of feminine energy around that masculine core, and vice versa with women. And so the more we can undo our conditioning, move through our traumas, the more we're actually going to express our masculine essence, which was a good teaching at that time, at that stage of my development, because I had been conditioned as a child, socially and in my family, to be a good boy. And I know I'm not alone in this. I grew up in a generation where we were taught to be good boys. Don't do harm, don't be aggressive, don't fight. And I particularly was shamed around having anger. And despite the good boy conditioning, I was still shamed for my sensitivity and showing my emotions and hurting a lot in sport. So it was a real shame shit show, to be honest, because I am naturally a more sensitive, empathic person, and it's something I've come to really celebrate about myself. I also had the cultural conditioning of suck it up, like stop being so sensitive, and on top of that, the shaming for my anger. So I really grew up with a lot of confusion around what it means to be a man. As I shared in the last podcast, I was needy with the feminine, but was afraid to initiate. And in the end, I just kind of shut everything down. And so why that teaching at that men's retreat was particularly good for me at that time was because it was really helpful and necessary for me to step into and claim an aspect of my masculinity, which was like a warrior energy. I needed discipline, I needed structure, I needed focus at that time in my life. I needed to have a mission beyond my own personal gratification, and that's what that retreat and that container gave me. It was really powerful, and because it was in such a binary way of explanation, I then also fell into the trap of like, I've got to be masculine. Any kind of feminine was, a weakness, essentially. That was the sort of unconscious program that I then picked up on. It's like if I was acting feminine, then that was my trauma and I was being soft, and I inevitably end up where that sort of teaching takes you, which was burnout. Which was grandiosity and me being a controlling, narcissistic douchebag. And, it's nuanced. It was actually a really essential part of my stage and development. And it was while I was in that men's group and that container that I did meet Greer. And in preparation for this podcast, we went back and had a look at some videos of when we were talking about polarity for our first couples retreat, and I'd just left that men's personal development group, and it was really interesting to see.
And cringe-worthy.
Yeah, it was so cringe.
We were going to share a snippet, and then we're like, actually, we don't want to.
Well, to be fair,
yeah,
it wasn't as cringy as I thought. Like, what we had to share was actually really valid, and it was more integrated than I was expecting.
Yeah.
But it was my energy in it
sure.
that was cringy. Like me talking over the top of you, thinking I'm so high and mighty. That was cringy.
Well, this was almost 9 years ago.
Yeah, thanks.
And you were in your, mid-20s?
Yeah.
You were a young man.
Young, dumb and full of cum.
So, yes, you were. So what's interesting, though, about that is that when we met, I was at a time where I had young children. My father had just passed, literally 1.5 months ago, like prior to us meeting. And I was in this state of deep reflection, deep openness, deep questioning. Like I was very much in my feminine. I was like, this thing of what I thought was life and what I knew the structure, that masculine container of what life was, I was in a deep surrender and inquiry to that. And I didn't have the lens of masculine and feminine at that time, but I can see now just in this conversation how I was in a very feminine state when we met. And I was teaching yoga. So I'd been on my path for quite a while, but I obviously wasn't where I am now. And so I can see why our polarity, your certainty with my questioning, that's a very strong magnetism right there. Mm-hmm. And so I remember when we first met, the first thing we said, I saw Aaron and said, because I was taking a yoga class, and Aaron came along, you were completing your PT training, and I asked you what you do, and you said...
I was training and studying to be a vibration coach.
Yeah, and I was like... I just liked the vibration. I was like so open, and I felt your certainty. You had such certainty, and there was a naivety to that too. There was like a...
magical thinking.
But there was a very strong pull straight away.
Yeah. And if, like, to bring it into a masculine feminine conversation, I was in a penetrative energy in terms I was ready to make my mark on the world.
Yeah.
And, like, show up and go, hey, this is who I am, this is what I stand for, and this is what I'm doing.
Yeah, whereas I was open, like, what is this about? Where am I being guided to? And really questioning everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd say, like, this is one of the powers of doing men's work for men, is so often we don't have spaces or containers for us to step into that, like, warrior energy and to channel our aggression in a healthy way. So many men in this current climate have been disempowered, and that is a separate conversation, but I just wanted to plant that there because men's work has been pivotal for me to embrace my masculine energy. And if you're in a relationship and you're the man, or you have a man who struggles for discipline, structure, having a sense of purpose, is stuck in lazy traps and just cycling around in dopamine addiction, get him to a men's group. Get him around other men who are in that mission-oriented, service-focused state of being.
And ideally get into an integrated men's circle.
Even if it's not that integrated, if a man is too much in his feminine energy, it can actually be helpful to get him in a bit of an unintegrated. Sure. Honestly, like,
yeah, it's like that pendulum.
It's the pendulum.
Yeah. If you want way. And I had also, just to speak of my work with women at that time that we met, I had been exploring my spirituality quite deeply for 5 years, and it was just continuing to go deeper. And I'd been working in women's work and running women's retreat for a few years when we had met. So what drew me to the women's work was an opportunity to sit in circle and really practice removing the veils and coming into a space where everyone was seeking their own truth and their own depth, and was away from the very close group of friends that I had and that I had loved deeply for many, many years, but I had recognized myself staying contained within the kind of inexplicit rules within that friendship group. And so it was really liberating for me to go into a new circle where people didn't know my background, they didn't know me from getting drunk in the sand dunes at 15, and I was just there and showed up how I was on that day. So the women's work for me was it was instrumental in me awakening to a new depth of myself and truth of myself that was because I wasn't in a conscious relationship at that time. I wasn't in a space where there wasn't a clear container where I could really be free to explore the inner workings of my psychology, my emotional being, my spiritual self. So really, Aaron, you were the first male who I met who was on that spiritual path, but also the empowerment side. And really my focus at the time was happiness and well-being. That was my business name, and it was about self-empowerment. But at that stage, it was really about, like, when I think back to what that was really about at that time, I remember quite a few friends were doing network marketing, and there was like a little bit of, was it girl boss energy? What do they call it? Like
boss babe
energy in terms of the empowerment. And it wasn't quite my truth. I kind of tried to do that a bit, but I realized that in this, and this is part of the shadow of the patriarchy and how it plays out with women. It's this role of, having been suppressed for so many years and not being able to vote and, not being able to choose when we had children, that again, as that pendulum spun, there was this sense of we can do anything that men can do, and we can create this, and we can have children, and we can have our businesses. And yes, there is a truth to that, but we can't actually do it all fully. We need to kind of choose what actually really matters to us, and then learn how to live our lives in a ways that is authentic to us, where we're living to our values, but we're not trying to stay caught up with the men, because we're not men. Our bodies are different. We're cyclical creatures. We're women, and we have this mysterious aspect of us that's deeply intuitive and that needs space so that we can allow that deeper truth to arise in.
Yeah, and have rhythms and cycles and not be on the go all the time.
Yeah.
I think what you just said there should have come with a trigger warning. I know it's fine for you. It's you live and breathe this, but a lot of women are attached to doing as much as men. And I think this is the perfect segue into speaking about the history of our collective evolution through polarity and masculine feminine dynamics. This is where the conversation of patriarchy and some of the nuances in it becomes really important. So if you think back to whether it was your parents or your grandparents' generation, there were those really clear gender roles. There was no question around it. Men were the providers, women were the caretakers. And to be honest, there was something that worked with that. Look at the civilization that was created. Look at what got built. You didn't have to think about polarity. It was built within the structure. But there was huge shadows because it was such a rigid gender role and men were only the masculine. And there was also so much cultural and societal shaming and degradation of the feminine in general. Women were suppressed. So not only was emotion suppressed, if we extend that out into nature, and we collectively call the earth Mother Nature. Nature is referred to as the feminine. There was the degradation and raping and pillaging of nature, suppression of the emotions, logic valued over any intuition. Empathy was unheard of. And I speak about that explicitly because both men and women were expressing that at that stage.
Yeah, and I think that Mad Men, the TV series Mad Men, that I know you haven't seen, I think it's George, I think his name, but Ham, the actor, he's the main character. He plays such a good example of the shadow of the masculine. He's off having affairs on his wife all the time. The wife is this like unhappy housewife who gets increasingly sad and angry and kind of wants to rebel in her own way. But there is this polarity between them. And really, it's only, 1 to 2, maybe 3 generations ago, depending on how old you are, that if a man provided the money and didn't bash his wife, he was considered a good husband. And likewise, if the mother kept the kids fed and bred well, then she was a good wife. And our expectations of what a marriage is has changed so dramatically within such few generations. It's really important to acknowledge that and to kind of normalize the confusion that if things were that way and if we're wanting to come here again, it makes sense that we need to swing that way, and women try to be men and men.
Just explain what you're doing with your arm for the listeners.
Well, I have done before, and I'm also, for those who are listening, I'm kind of making a pendulum with my fist. And so whenever we're wanting to create greater balance, often that comes from the recognition that we've gone too far one way. And if you think about a pendulum swinging, if a pendulum has been held up on one angle, in order for it to come to balance, it needs to swing the other way so it can kind of gradually swing back the other way, and then gradually over time it will find its own center point. Mm-hmm. And even the balance, it will move, it will kind of still drift. It's not this stagnant energy.
Yeah. And that pendulum is applicable to lots of different contexts. If you've been suppressing anger, quite often you've got to go into rage to have a connection to that emotion. Mm-hmm. If you've been boundaryless, quite often you've got to have really rigid boundaries and say no to a lot of things to then find your authentic no. For me as a young man, I went from having no self-esteem to being grandiose. Like, the pendulum applies in lots of different contexts. Mm-hmm. And as a result of this rigid, toxic, patriarchal consciousness, it makes complete sense that we had the rise of feminism. We had women's empowerment, the right to vote, women getting back in the workplace, and we started to see women stand up for themselves and start to compete with men in the workplace.
Yeah. And it's had huge ramifications on the family makeup as well. And obviously, more children are in childcare now than ever before. And it's really important, and we want to be really explicit. We're not demonizing the rise of woman. It was absolutely needed.
100%.
Absolutely. And I think it's easy for me, having not lived in the time where women couldn't vote. I can't really explain, I can't really know what that was like. Okay. So I just want to name that. We're not demonizing that. And at the same time, if we're bringing it back into polarity and the impact on relationship and this inner feminine and masculine, how it relates is having a bit of societal awareness and understanding what's happened at the macro, so that we can recognize that if there's a lack of polarity in relationship, it's worth looking at how our inner masculine and feminine playing out in the world. And do we both have similar roles? If you've got two couples and they're both working full-time, perhaps they've got a shared business, the kids are in care or looking after someone else, they're both in their masculine. It makes sense that they come home and they're both tired and they just need to rest, and they're both in their feminine. That's okay. It's not that that's wrong. It just means that is going to mean that there's not a lot of polarity, because they're either both in their masculine at work and then they come home, they're in their feminine. And although they're alternating between those energies, they're not exchanging, and so there's not going to be the same charge. Whereas, I know, again, Michaela Boehm, who I've been studying under for over 10 years now, and who's a wealth of wisdom in this area. We've both studied with her in person as well, and Steve James, that even if it's me as a woman who is out earning the money, and perhaps Aaron was the stay-at-home dad, if I come home, if he stays in that stay-at-home and I stay in there like, okay, well, now I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and I'm not actually resting in my feminine, we're not going to have the chemistry. I need to be able to come into my feminine, and then perhaps it's in the bedroom that Aaron rises in his provision and his masculinity. Then you can create the charge. So it's okay in many respects. It doesn't really matter who has which roles, but it's understanding that if you're both in similar energies in the roles, you're not going to have the chemistry. You need to find the complementary opposite.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. And one of the consequences of the necessary rise of feminism and women's empowerment is you've either got two people in the masculine, or you've got the woman in the masculine and a disempowered man. And that disempowerment can often be a result of that good boy conditioning that I spoke to earlier. And quite often, if that's the case, that's usually what's happening when the woman experiences what it's like to be mothering her partner. And this is a huge relationship killer. So often the man has been conditioned to be the good boy. He doesn't know how to initiate, or he's afraid to initiate. He's in a place of comfort, happy for her to make the plans, do the organising, take care of the bills, and he just kind of becomes this passive bystander. The issue is that over time, she's going to start unconsciously resenting him. And I've seen this time and time again, unfortunately. The man doesn't have a spine. He is afraid to embrace his masculinity because, again, one of the shadow sides of feminism is the shaming of masculinity. And an immature way to look at women's empowerment is that it requires the disempowerment of men. Not true. We need men and women standing side by side in their wholeness. And part of the wholeness for men is embracing not only their spine, but also their emotions. And so at a certain stage of development, when the woman has reclaimed her power, she's starting to access more of her autonomy and capacity to take care of herself, then what's required for a couple to continue to grow and develop is for the man to access more of his feelings, create emotional literacy, learn to communicate more, learn to empathize. And this is incredibly important because, to thread it back to what we were saying at the start, this is what brings couples onto the same page. And it creates that sameness, that shared respect and mutual agreements. And this is beautiful. And from the outside, it really looks like there's a lot of success. It's functional, it's warm, yet. And this is why a lot of good, high functioning couples can come to us, is because that spark is missing. And why that is because their difference has faded away. There's something inherently primal in who I am as man. There's something inherently primal in who she is as woman. And integration is a phase. So what I mean by that is integrating our masculine and feminine within. It's a phase, it's not a destination. And to go forward, we've actually got to go back a bit and start to access more of that primal nature. What I mean by that is consciously accessing who I am as man, meaning consciously choosing to step up and to lead my wife, my woman. Whereas in that much earlier phase of unconscious, rigid patriarchy, there was all that shadow. When we get to this phase of integration, it then becomes a conscious choice. It's something we're choosing. And when I can step up and be the leader and create the safe space for my woman, we start to access that primal energy that creates so much charge.
Yeah, and as Aaron holds that and provides that for me, he becomes a container in which it is safe for me to soften, it is safe for me to feel and express. And again, because at that stage a woman has worked on her own boundaries, she's no longer self-abandoning, she's letting go of the people-pleasing. And again, this is a continual thing. Just this morning I found myself caught on something, I had to come back. But as I do that more and more, and I'm held safely, as I soften more and more and dare to not contain myself, in the sense of letting go of who I think I should be and really allow my truth to express and flow through me, then not only does that help me as Greer express myself, but it actually, I can become a portal for different feminine energies and different archetypes to flow through. So this is particularly in the bedroom. If Aaron is holding that presence and that safety, that makes it safe for me to let go of that egoic, any of those kind of feelings. Or is it safe for me to really devote myself to this pleasure and devote myself to this man and really own that, yeah, actually I want it too, or I love pleasure, and also, is it safe for me to just really relax and open and receive, and I don't have to perform. I'm just a gateway to the divine, basically. And I'm saying I because I'm talking about me, but obviously all of us as humans have access to this. But again, we have to have that safety as the foundation. We have to emotional connection. We have to feel like we're in this together. We have to work through our own inner masculine, feminine, shadow traits, and then come back to coming more and more into that natural binary role.
Yeah, exactly. And we have the 6 relational needs of awakened intimacy within our awakened intimacy program, and we've framed it like a pyramid. And at that base is safety, and at the very top is growth, difference, and aliveness. And it's everything in between that allows us to get to this stage. So if you're listening, just know that, as Greer said, we need that foundation of safety, coming into equality and mutual respect, knowing how to emotionally connect, emotionally express, and hold each other's vulnerability. And then once we're at that place, then we're going to first class, as you named it in the previous podcast, tapping into a primal energy. It's exciting, it's alive, it's so juicy. And I think there's a lot of stigma and judgment around the polarity flip within our culture at the moment, with women, being more in the workplace and in their doing nature. And maybe there's not so much judgment and shame around that. It probably is more celebrated, to be honest. But I know, for men, it's not as celebrated for them to be in the vulnerability and their emotions, and there are safe places arising for that. But this polarity flip within men and women is essential. It's actually so important for us to continue to evolve and integrate and become more whole and balanced and respectful and equals. And then once we've got that, it's about tapping into that primal self.
Yeah. And that doesn't, again, all of this is very nuanced. And so depending on where you are in your journey individually and as a couple, there's going to be different steps that you may need to shift up into or perhaps revisit and integrate. And likewise in the bedroom, Aaron isn't always in the leadership. There are if Aaron's always in leading and I'm always kind of following and allowing and surrendering, even that will get boring over time. So we all have our natural home flavor and home rhythm and home energy that we kind of like. But again, if we're in a long-term monogamous relationship, that will get boring even if it's our home flavor. So we need on home energy. So it's still important that I, for example, take times where I'm initiating, where I'm being that director, and you to just receive, which
submissive,
submissive. Submissive.
I'm not submissive, but receptive.
Receptive, that's a better word. So, and again, it's about being safe for people to explore and talk about new things. And we did a clip the other day which we might tack on to the end of this podcast of asking one another questions. And I think one of the reasons why the polarity, when you work at the foundational level of safety and then you're actually doing the practical things like actually learning communication frameworks and really getting clear on your values and what your needs are and desires and how you ask for that, and taking responsibility for yourself and all of those pieces, that once that's happened, the polarity actually becomes a natural outcome. And as Aaron said, a lot of that is about aliveness and growth, and a lot of that newness comes because both partners are growing and they're evolving, so they're not the same person that they were 2 years ago. If Aaron was the same person as he was 2 years ago, I wouldn't be as magnetized to you. Not because I didn't love you back then, but because it would have become a bit, I don't know,
bland.
Boring.
Yeah, bland. Yeah.
So we need to it's a basic human need to grow, and it's not about always reaching and always striving. We need to be present in the moment, but it's about understanding that if you are in that loving, safe, heart-centered relationship, but the polarity is missing, that one of the simplest ways to re-spark that is to come back into those, revisit the masculine, feminine roles, but also create some newness. And that can just be, you don't have to go away for the weekend. You could, kids are out, have sex in the lounge room. You could just shift it as much as that, or you can actually go on a growth journey of some sort together where you're actually evolving and bringing in new aspects of yourselves and therefore evolving the relationship.
And to share an example of that nuance and healthy balance of both, I was reminded of a conversation that I had with a friend that I hadn't seen for a long time, and he was sharing how he'd actually really enjoyed being the stay-at-home dad, and that his partner and wife was out working more, making more money, and he was actually okay with that. And to a man that's in that situation, in that dynamic, that can work, and it is often a healthy evolution of what it means to be man and woman. And if they're wanting to ensure that they keep the polarity, keep the spark, then my advice to a man like that is ensure that you can initiate and lead your woman when she gets home. Take her into the bedroom, show her who's boss.
About that. I wouldn't use that language.
Wouldn't you?
No.
What language would you use?
I would say, show her who's your daddy.
Yeah, okay, right.
Who's the daddy?
Okay, interesting. Here we go. Here's a segment that is going to pique some interest, because in preparation for this podcast, we wanted to explore, if a woman who's in a relationship finds herself mothering her partner, why is that so dysfunctional and repelling, yet when a man steps into what we call his big daddy energy, like
Pronounced big daddy energy.
why is that got charged to it? And this was planted in my mind back in that podcast we did where I got you to do the reaction video, and she says, I call him daddy in the bedroom, and
Sir in the house,
and then I think from that in my feed I came across a page that does pranks on kids where the mother or the wife or even the daughter will call their partner daddy in front of the kids or or her dad or something. And it's just hilarious to watch the responses, because there's something inherently charged when a woman will call a man daddy, and it can evoke a lot of things. And so we decided to play with it, and it was actually like pretty hot. It's vulnerable to say that, but it was. And in unpacking this and learning like what's actually underneath it,
the psychology
of it, the psychology of the big daddy energy is that it's actually a sign that a man has got that integration of being able to provide, of being safe, but also emotionally attuned and empathic. Would you agree?
Well, yeah, like an integrated father provides safety, and he also provides care and tenderness.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's safe for the woman in if we're looking at this dynamic, I'll speak as woman. If I know that you've got it, it's certainly not about you. What was the words that you said?
Be boss.
You're showing boss. Yeah, that is like, I kind of want to cancel that out of the podcast. It's not that at all.
It's good, because I don't know where that came from. It's not language I normally use, but like there would be men that would think that. So
yeah. Maybe
let's roll with that.
Channeling the collective consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. You can reframe it as woman. Why isn't that a term?
I don't want you to be bossing me, because that, to me, that evokes me having to please you. I have to forgo what I might want. It's not really safe for me to express my needs because you're boss, and so what you want matters. And that's where women come into performance, pleasing, faking, all of that stuff.
Wow.
Whereas if you've got the big daddy energy, I can't even say it without like, then you've got me. I'm free to play. I'm free to open. I'm free to express the innocence of my sexuality and to enjoy it and to all of that yumminess. So, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. I think we've got to end the podcast here. Joking.
And, the polarity to that is if I want to claim my inner slut. You love it when I claim my inner slut.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to be
this
this innocent, like, kind of receiver of that energy. So again, they're polarities, and the difference is that there's this, it's not about, like, we don't dress up. It's not about dressing up and pretending to play role, although there's nothing wrong with that if that's what works for you both. And all of this stuff, there's nothing wrong with any of it if it works for you. If you have the magnetism that you want, if you have the polarity that you want, it doesn't matter you could pretend to be a cat and dog, right? It just does not matter. Like, if that's what floats your boat, it's what happens between the two of you is your business. We're talking about polarity and having the safe space to actually really express what you're wanting, what you're needing, what you're desiring, or what feels growing edge, and then kind of play with that in a way that's safe, so that you're like taking a bit of a risk by saying something, and then that's held, and so that creates like a certain container of what you can play with, and then you want to expand beyond that. And this is where we talk about growing edge, and it's normal that as we're expanding, it feels a bit new, it feels a bit edgy. But again, if we do that in a way where it's safe, where we're not doing anything that we're not ready for, and we're not doing it just so that our partner stops hassling us, or that we can be enough for our partner or keep them, that's not going to work well. Okay, but if we're actually doing it from this place of shared growth, shared newness, shared growing edge, and really in it together, then that creates an amazing play field for infinite possibilities. And like we did I'm not sure if I said it the last podcast, but we did the maths one day on how many times we
You did say that.
we did. But so it just means that you can create more and more newness because you're expanding more and more, and yet you're staying within the agreements of the relationship.
And so to wrap this up, men, if you're out there, I've got a challenge for you. Notice where you've become passive in the relationship, where you've just been going through the motions and just letting her take the lead out of habit, not out of respect, but just because it's comfortable and easy. And then flip that. Choose one thing that you know you can step up and take care of and initiate, not because you've been asked to, but because you want to, because you're a grown man.
And women, have a think about, where have you been overleading? Where have you been taking over responsibility of a role that perhaps the husband or partner could be doing? That could look like organising his appointments rather than just letting him to do it. It could be wanting him to take a specific action but not actually asking him, just wanting him to intuit what you want and him not doing it and therefore staying quietly resentful about it. Perhaps next time you go for a drive, you actually don't want to drive. You really would actually love your partner to drive and just sit there in the passenger seat and just enjoy it. Don't be on your phone ticking off more things to do. Put on some music and chill. Be in your feminine, receive. Allow your man to provide the drive. And so it's in those little micro moments that dotted throughout the day, throughout the week, that are the opportunities to practice polarity outside of the bedroom, so that when you come into the bedroom, in that more vulnerable space, you've already been practicing those roles.
And as we expressed in the last podcast, bad sex or no sex is a symptom of unmet needs, unspoken desires, and unconscious dynamics. And polarity can also give us a really big indicator on what needs developing, what needs to grow in the relationship, what needs addressing. So if you are wanting to address the unconscious dynamics within your relationship, go to our website, go to the services tab and book in the relationship clarity call. Within that call, we're going to map your relationship dynamic and, most importantly, identify what the strategies are to resolve that and make it more functional, more loving, more intimate and connected moving forward.
So thank you so much for listening to this podcast. As always, if you have any questions, if you have any reflections that you want to share with us, we would love to hear from you. Connect at intimacyforcouples.com, or you can follow us on our socials. And if there is a topic that you've been wanting us to cover, then we would love to hear from you.
Dare to go deeper. It's our tagline.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna, yeah.
You were gonna what?
I don't know. I was just waiting for one other line. Maybe just like, okay, that's it for us.
We'll see you next time.
Yeah.
Subscribe if, yeah. And we've been getting lots of really positive feedback from our podcast. And if you've been loving it, please leave a review. It would be really nice. It would help us spread the word and get more people having healthy, loving, intimate relationships.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.